Good morning. This is Jean Roman, and you are at For Dragonflies and Me. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode of my Gardening 101. I'm super excited. Gardening season is really in full swing now. And so I'm trying to create a bunch of great content for you guys, practical content that, every home gardener needs to know and implement in their gardens. And again, whether you are a seasoned gardener that has been gardening for years, we have things to learn from each other. And that's why I always say, give me your feedback. Or if you're a beginner, this is great content for both the experienced and the novice gardener. So if this is your first time here, welcome. Again, I'm Jean Roman, and this is For Dragonflies and Me. You're visiting me either at my YouTube channel or watching my YouTube channel at my blog at fordragonfliesandme.com. Either way, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited for you to be here. If this is your first time here, generally what I do is I create a beautiful PowerPoint that I read through, and then I just interject with a lot of comments and stuff. This way, it's easy for you to go back and do any screenshots or take notes or whatnot. This way it can help you with your own gardens, obviously. So before I get into the PowerPoint, be sure to smash that subscribe button, smash that like button, and more importantly, leave me a comment to anything that you hear here today or any other video. I love your feedback. I love sharing gardening tips. And I can learn from you, you can learn from me. So all the better. So now I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. I'm going to make that a slideshow. And welcome. Thank you for being here. Again, this is For Dragonflies and Me, tips and tricks for the home and garden. So, welcome. Today's topic is Gardening 101, and we are going to talk about why trellising your tomatoes is a must and 5 tips for success. So first and foremost, I'm going to do a confession. Most of you have been following you. Many of you have been following me for years, and you know that I've shown you pictures. I always show you pictures of what I'm doing. I do live videos, but I admit I have not always trellised my tomatoes as hard as I am doing it now. Yes, I have to use tomato cages, and I've always used those 100%. I've also used some stakes in growing different crops, as like certain types of cherry tomatoes that are really vining, which I'll talk about in here. But I really do feel that it is the best way to grow my tomatoes. I just never really took the time. When we had the farm, it was a lot. And so using stakes and tomato cages, it was a lot. And so unfortunately we didn't always do that, and we did lose a lot of fruit. So I am now, doing just my home garden, and I want to do everything right, and I want to teach you guys everything that I'm incorporating and that I feel is the best way to garden, especially with tomatoes. So friends, I am taking the time now, as it will provide me with a healthier and more abundant crop of tomatoes. So unfortunately, quite frankly, I got tired of my plants sprawling all over the tomato cages and the raised beds, taking up valuable space, all the while making it difficult to harvest those ripe, juicy tomatoes. And so trellising my tomato plants will provide more space for me to grow around them. And this will allow me the opportunity to succession plant more effectively. It will also improve my airflow and reduce the risk of diseases on my plants. And not to mention, trellis tomatoes are easier to care for and harvest, resulting, of course, in a better yield. Okay, so now all of a sudden it doesn't want to work. This thing every now and then. So, okay, so now you may be asking, okay, that's all great, Jean, but where do I start, right? So, well, friends, you start right here. In today's episode, I'm going to provide you with 5 tips for successful trellising for your tomato plants, and choosing the right trellis to proper pruning techniques, which are all key things that we need to incorporate when we're trellising. So whether you're a veteran gardener or a novice just starting out, these tips will help you achieve a bountiful tomato harvest and beautiful garden. So let's get started and take your tomato growing to the next level. So if you heard that sneezing, that's Frankie. I hug under the table. And if you follow me at all, everybody knows and loves Frankie from Frankie Fridays on my Facebook page. So he must be feeling the allergies too. But anyways, let's get rolling here. And so here is a photograph of one of my new raised beds in my garden with some tomato cages that are staked. So let's talk first here about the benefits of trellising your tomato plants. Trellising your tomato plants has numerous benefits, obviously. First and foremost, it saves space. Instead of sprawling all over your garden, trellis tomatoes grow vertically, so upward, taking up less ground space. This means you can grow more plants in a smaller area, like raised beds, and making the most of your garden space. And that's what we want. We want to be able to utilize every square inch of our gardens effectively. So additionally, trellising improves your airflow around your plants, which I've mentioned already a couple times. But this reduces the risk of diseases such as blight, which thrive in warm, humid conditions. So by keeping the plants off the ground, you reduce the risk of soil-borne diseases. And so here I have a picture of my tomato cages and in my beds right now. I'm actually going to transplant these. If you've been following me, I just ordered 3 more beds, and I'm going to transplant these tomatoes at the other end of the garden. Again, most of you who have been following me know that I just moved to this home. So there is a tree over top of this, and it does get decent amount of sun in the morning. But for my tomatoes, I really want them to have more sun than this bed is providing. So I am going to transplant those, and I am actually going to create another bamboo trellis to have them grow over. And I'm going to get a little bit more into that of why I'm choosing to not use these tomato cages. But if you do look in there, there's that little green stick in there. That is a stake, a type of a garden stake. There's many varieties. And so I would be using that to give the cage and the tomato more stability. But again, I'm not going to do those here. You can use tomato cages. Just a little pro tip here for computers. Cucumbers and zucchinis, yellow squash, anything that vines, it does actually help to keep the plant off the ground. So avoiding those diseases. So here is my raised bed and my other tomato bed where I have my bamboo trellis. So trellising also helps to elevate your plants so it's much more easy to harvest your plants. And when tomatoes are left to sprawl on the ground, they really become tangled up and difficult to manage. So this can make it a hard to spot pests. It can lead to fruit rotting on the ground before you even see it to harvest it. And by trellising your tomato plants, you keep the fruit off the ground. And we definitely want the fruit off the ground, making it easier to harvest and less rot. Because unfortunately, when a tomato lays on the ground, it gets a yucky spot on it, and you end up having to cut off, therefore wasting. So trellising also makes pruning and training your tomato plants easier, which can result in a better yield. So I'm going to go into this a little bit later in the episode, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention so you remember what I'm talking about. So if you look at the picture on the right side, it's a better view. You can see where the ground level is, as well as, and then that bottom bamboo rod. So from the ground to that rod, I am going to prune off all the leaves and only leave the center, the main stem. And I'm going to talk about that because, as you can see, if you're following me at all, I just did a video on mulching your raised beds with grass clippings. So here you can see that there are red potatoes planted down on there's 2 rows of them. You can see those little white knives actually in the garden, identifying the rows. And there's parsley or cilantro, I can't remember what that is. And then you can see at the back and the front, there's a row of lettuces, marigolds in the corners and centers, and there's also onions and garlic planted around the perimeter as well, in between, as well as some basil. So that is me incorporating companion planting, which I talk so highly about, to help benefit the plants and also deter bad bugs. So but the key here is I want you to remember that space in between. So here's some beautiful aromas, the Amish paste. Before we get any deeper, I want to talk a little bit about the tomato plant anatomy, so you have a better understanding of some of the terms that I'm going to be using here shortly. So when it's helpful to understand the anatomy so that when I'm explaining these things, you're going to understand. Tomatoes are a vine plant generally, which means they grow best when they have something to climb on. The main stem of the tomato plant grows upwards, and as it grows, it produces lateral shoots called suckers that also grow upward. These suckers can become new stems if left to grow, which can result in a bushy, sprawly plant. To trellis your tomato plants, you'll need to train the main stem to grow up a support, such as a stake or a trellis or a twine, a piece of rope, of even fabric works. You'll also need to remove those suckers, which can divert energy away from the main stem and reduce your yield of tomatoes. So to remove those suckers, you simply pinch them off when they are small before they have a chance to grow into stems. And so, excuse me, I want to go into this a little bit deeper though. Okay, so first and foremost, the main stem of your tomato plant, it grows upwards. And so remember in the last slide, I said I'm not going to allow any leaves to grow on that stem, keeping that area open. It's also to allow me to do more succession planting, to where I'm going to put some lettuces under there and get that growing. But the suckers. So if you think of the main stem hide my face there, the main stem of the tomato, okay? And then you have a leaf. So there's your leaf right there. And then if you have grown tomatoes before, you maybe see that little, where my thumb is, that's the sucker. And so you want to pull those off. And as soon as you can see them, just pinch them with your fingers, because they will take a lot of the energy again out of creating a big, healthier plant and producing more tomatoes. The other thing I want to mention here is that, most tomatoes are vines, and that's an indeterminate tomato. I did an episode earlier in the month on what are the differences between a determinate and indeterminate type of tomato. So again, a determinate type is more of a bush type, which grow better in a tomato cage, as opposed to an indeterminate, which is a vine. If you have ever grown yellow pear or red pear, or are thinking about growing that cherry tomato, it is an heirloom. It's beautiful, it's delicious, but that gets up to be like an 8 to 12 foot vine. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to get into the different types of trellising with stakes, cages, and actual trellis, my bamboo ones. And I'm going to go into a little bit more about that. I'm going to talk about the stakes. But staking your tomatoes is a great way for cherry tomatoes as well as any variety, but that tomato really does well on a stake, and you can just easily get it to grow up there. But by remembering to prune back the suckers and keeping that main stem tied carefully onto the stake or the trellis or the cage. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on being careful with that too, and when I talk about some common mistakes. So here we go. As you all know, I love heirloom tomatoes, and the center one that actually is at the bottom, that's actually an elderberry blossom. So I used to make my own elderberry syrup for my kids. So there's some lemon cucumbers in there, and there's some beautiful heirloom tomatoes. So I just love heirlooms. So now let's talk about the types of trellises, and this is where I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. But there are several types, 3 main types, and we're going to talk about those. So it will depend on your space, your budget, and your personal preference. But here are a few options to consider. Let's chat. So here's some stakes. And these are the type of stakes that I actually used to use. They're like a 2x2 piece of lumber. And you really need them to be at least 12 feet, at minimum 10 feet, because you have to stake them into the ground, and they got to go into the ground about 2 feet minimum. 3 feet is best. So you use just a post hole pounder. It's a long metal tube with 2 handles, and you boom, 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 and you can drive a stake into the ground. You can use T-posts, re-rod. I mean, it really depends on what you are growing. Re-rod would be an expensive option and rather difficult to work with, but you can even use like wire fencing, hog panel. You just got to make sure that you have enough room to get your hands into harvest the crops. I always use cattle panels for my grape arbors, but we're going to talk about staking right now. So stakes are a simple and inexpensive way to trellis your tomato plants. To stake your plants, you simply drive them a sturdy wooden or metal stake into the ground next to each of your plants, and then tie the main stem to the stake as it grows. And this will help the plant growing upward to prevent it from falling over. So this is one thing I want to mention right here is when you're tying it. I'm going to bring this up a couple times. But when you have your whatever you're using, if it's a garden twine, a garden tape, little pieces of fabric. If you are at my blog, if you scroll down, I have just a few extra pictures of different types of ways to trellis and using string as well as like little pieces of fabric to tie it. But the key is to not tie it tight. Think about a tree. A tree grows bigger. Well, so does a tomato vine. So your little stem is going to start out, maybe the size of a pencil stem, but then it is going to get bigger to where it's a big, big finger, if you want to say. And so that is going to grow. So if you put your twine around the stem too tightly, it's going to cut into it. I'm sure if you've ever seen like a tree that has grown into a fence, or a tree, something that's grown in, it's because it grew around it. Which your tomato plant can be damaged and more likely to be damaged than grow around it because it's not that hardy. So thinking about that. But another thing you can use these stakes for, pro tip here, is for beans, cucumbers, zucchini. Those are great for these as well. And what I used to do I used to make teepee bean poles at my farm. And so I drive one of these stakes in, and then I put a screw at the top and then put strings down. Twine, actually, baler twine, because it doesn't break down. And then using the garden staples, what I use for my securing down my ground cover underneath the pea stone in the garden. You put those into the ground, or even a large stake, and you can put that and you tie it in that string, and then you plant your green bean or cucumber at each of those stakes in the ground, and it grows right up the string. It actually makes a beautiful teepee. And so you can do that with pole beans, which is what I did them with. But you can also, again, use these for a vining tomato. I used to grow my yellow and red grape tomatoes on these. They were great. I'm gonna actually do some of these with my bamboo poles. They're obviously not going to be as sturdy because they're not as tall, for one thing, and they're not solid like a piece of lumber. So tomato cages. Tomato cages are a great option and a very popular option for trellising your tomatoes. But I really highly recommend, if you're going to use tomato cages, you need to be focused on determinate tomatoes, which grow in more of a bush. A 8-foot vining tomato is not going to, this tomato cage is not going to be sufficient for it, which is what I've always done. I've just used tomato, in most, like I said, I did use the stakes, but in most of my tomato growing, I've always used the cages. So I'm really excited to use the bamboo trellises and show you guys all of that this season. But they're generally made of wire mesh or plastic. They can be a little flimsy. You can buy really expensive ones. You can buy really cheap ones. So it depends on your budget. How much do you want to invest? How many tomatoes you're going to grow? But tomato cages also work really well in your like patio pots. If you have a big pot, I 100% recommend putting a tomato cage in that pot so your tomato to grow. And then kind of like my bamboo trellis. So if you see in this picture, you have your bottom ring, center ring, and top ring. So again, from that bottom ring, well, from the ground up to that center ring, that metal ring, you want to pluck off the leaves. You want to have your fruit growing above and between the center and the top rings, so that you, again, are getting the best yield with your tomato plants. So I'm actually moving these tomatoes. I think I already said that, but I'm going to put these tomatoes into another bed with my bamboo trellises. So tomato cages are definitely serve a purpose. They are better for determinate tomatoes, and they are better to use in potted tomatoes, which are more bush type. So, and then if I think I did mention, I did an episode on indeterminate and determinate tomatoes, what the difference is and what's the best ways to grow them, and how to choose which is better for your situation. So you definitely want to watch that episode as well. And so trellising. So here is one of the bamboo trellises that I made. This one actually has cucumbers growing under it. So in the far back left corner are my heirloom lemon cucumbers, and then to the far back right, I have my pickling cucumbers, and then to the far right front, I have regular cucumbers for cutting. And I need to plant something else in the left front. So I'm just not sure what I want to do. I might just put another tomato plant there. I'm not sure. Then I have some kale. And again, you can see all the companion planting and succession planting. I have onions growing. And garlic, you can see kind of little green spikies, marigolds always. And there are some lettuces, and then there's the 4 kales in the front. In the back, you can see the green little spiky things. Those are my garlic or onions. So, utilizing this space, again, you want to get your most bang for your buck in your spot for what you have. But to use trellises are another option for trellising indeterminate type of tomatoes. Remember, we want them to grow up and high. A trellis can be made of wood or metal and can be designed in a variety of shapes and sizes. To use a trellis, simply attach it to the ground or a ground support structure and train the main stem again to grow up that trellis. And as the plant grows, you will need to tie it to the trellis to keep it from falling over. And again, remembering to use a product to tie your tomato that is not going to damage the stem. So now that you got the basic gist of trellising tomatoes, I want to go into a couple of my 5 tips for successful tomato trellising. And so it's kind of revamping what I just said, or rehashing what I just said, but I want to go over this real quick. So again, choosing the right trellis for your space. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many types of trellises to choose from. So when you're selecting your trellis, you need to consider the size of your garden, the number of tomato plants you want to grow, and your budget, of course. And do you have access to other materials that you can make stuff? Are you a handy person that can, maybe take an old pallet and create a really cool trellis, which I can already totally imagine in my mind. But if you have limited space, a simple stake may be the best option. So if you have more room and want to support multiple plants, a cage or a trellis may be the better choice for you. But again, whether you have a large garden or you're just growing some patio pots, consider, what you want to grow and what is the best option for you. And then training your plants early is really essential. It's important to start training them early. So when your plants are young, you gently, like I've said, tie the main stem to the trellis or stake and remove any suckers that are growing. As the plant grows, continue to tie it to the support structure, being careful not to tie it too tightly, which can and will damage your stem. So next is pruning your plants. Pruning your tomato plants is essential for successful trellising as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you'll need to remove any suckers that grow, as they will divert energy away from the main stem and they will reduce your yield. So you also want to prune any branches that grow below the first fruit cluster, as these branches are unlikely to produce any fruit and can also, again, divert that energy away from the main stem. So remember when I was showing you that from the ground to the bottom pole in my bamboo trellis, and I said, I'm going to be plucking back any leaves, cutting back any leaves from here. That's what I'm talking about right here. So watering and fertilizing your tomato plants is also really important. I recommend fertilizing your plants once a week. And what I use is a liquid fish emulsion. And you can use that on the plants, spraying it. So a foliar feed is what that's called. And I recommend doing that in the early morning when the plant's pores are open. So the tomato plants leaves, all of your plants, honestly, their pores are open to take in the moisture so that they can withstand the heat of the day. After that sun gets hot, they close the pore to hold in the moisture. So when you fertilize those plants, when the pores are open, it takes it in, and boy, oh boy, you can just watch the plants grow. But watering them is very important as well. Rain obviously gives nutrients that I don't even understand, but watering your plants is essential. And with tomatoes, you don't want to overwater them. Tomatoes actually like to be watered, like saturated, and then dried out. Watered and then let to dry out. Oftentimes, if you've ever noticed that your tomatoes will split, and you'll notice that happens often after a really heavy rain. And so the plant got saturated with water, it took the water up really quickly, and then it grew faster. The tomato grew faster than the skin could grow. And that's what causes tomato splits on most tomatoes. So you want to water the ground, not the plant. So it's different than fertilizing. So watering, you want to water the ground around the stem, which again, when you're plucking off all those leaves, you have that bottom area. Don't water the plant over head. I know that might be hard if you have a large garden like I do, and I do use an overhead sprinkler. So I know I'm telling you to not do something that I do. But generally with watering with an overhead sprinkler, It's not saturating the plant, I guess. And so I will go and then water the tomato plants actually as well. So think about that in when you're watering your plants. You know, if you are watering your plants with a can or a hose, water the ground, not the plant. So another key thing is harvesting your fruit regularly. And in most things, when you harvest, you're stimulating more growth, especially if you have an indeterminate tomato. Doesn't really impact the development of more fruit with a determinant because it has a set amount. But you want to harvest your fruit as it ripens, and it can become really heavy and actually pull your plant down and damage and break stems. So you really want to think about when you're tying your tomatoes to your trellis as well, and like doing it frequently and in so that your plant is being supported, because those tomatoes get really heavy. So harvest your fruit as soon as it's ripe and be sure to check your plants regularly. So there's that picture. So common tomato trellising mistakes to avoid. So while trellising your tomato plants can be a great way to save space and improve your yield, there are a few common mistakes to avoid. And one of the most common mistakes is tying your plant too tightly to the support structure, which can damage the stem, which we've talked about multiple times during this episode. So another common mistake is using a trellis that isn't sturdy enough to support the weight of the plant. And that goes back to using a tomato cage for a determinate tomato and using stakes and trellises for an indeterminate. So as you can see here in this photograph, you can see my green tomato cage with the tomato plant falling out of it. It is really hard to manage it all if you're not doing it every day and keeping it manageable. And so like plucking all the leaves off the bottom stems. And so I am on a mission this year. And we all are, right? If you're a gardener, you're like, oh, Jean, I've been there, right? So I know I'm not talking to, people who don't know, and haven't experienced it. But if you are a newbie, really take this advice from people who have, not listen to themselves. But it makes it a lot easier when you don't overcrowd and when you have space so that, your tomatoes are growing better so that you're not wasting your crops. So be sure to think about the type of tomato you have and what trellis you need to use. So be sure to choose a trellis or a stake that is sturdy enough to support your plants and tie them to the support structure gently and regularly, being careful not to damage that stem. Okay, so now you have your trellises, you know how to use them, and you're thinking, you're brainstorming now what you're going to do. How do you maintain those trellises? Well, I suggest, making sure that you want them to last for seasons, especially these bamboos. I don't want to have to buy another fence and make a new one. So I was just actually talking to Dave. Yeah, at the end of the season, I'm definitely going to take these out of the ground so the supports that are in the bottom of it is not going to rot in the dirt, which it will. It's wood. And so we're going to store those either in the garage or in the potting shed so that they stay out of the weather and they don't rot or get ruined. Tomato cages, you should keep those in a dry space too. Keep them in your potting shed, or if you have a little greenhouse or garage, so that they don't get rusty and break. The more you take care of them, the longer they're going to last for you. And another important thing to think about too is taking off all the dead debris, removing any ties that are on there, disposing of that stuff, and storing them appropriately. So repairing any broken parts is also essential, if possible. If not, think of another way you can utilize it or pitch it, recycle. So, trellising your tomato plants is a great way to save space, improve airflow, reduce the risk of diseases, and improve your yield. So, by choosing the right trellis, training your plants early, pruning them regularly, and harvesting your fruit as soon as it's ripe, you can achieve a bountiful tomato harvest and a beautiful garden. So, whether you're a seasoned garden or a novice just starting out, these tips will help you take your tomato growing to the next level, soar with your tomatoes. So, get out there, trellis your plants, and enjoy those juicy, delicious tomatoes all season long. As you can see here, this was that picture that from the previous one where the tomato is falling out of the cage. So you can see how that bed started with 6 little tomato plants, and those marigolds were bushing out, and it's a great way to use your space, but use it effectively. So I just think trellising your tomatoes is the key to successful tomato growing. I did want to say too, I am going to do a video on removing the suckers, and I am also going to do a video on tying and trellising your tomatoes. So I know this is just the basic information, and I am a hands-on kind of person. So I am definitely going to help provide you with more details in providing those videos for you. So if you enjoyed this, be sure, and you'd like to see more episodes like this, visit me at my blog or stay here at my YouTube channel for dragonfliesandme.com, and be sure to subscribe. If you found value in this video, I ask you to please smash that subscribe button and the like button, but even more importantly, do those two things and leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. YouTube, I'm really trying hard to grow my following here, and YouTube, the more you guys subscribe and more you like and more you comment, YouTube's algorithm will pick that up and show my content to other people. So I love what I do. I love sharing with all of you. And I certainly hope I have encouraged you to grow your own food. But don't be dismayed if you don't have a big garden. Even if you just do a container garden, it's better than nothing. It's a great alternative. And so again, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, smash that subscribe button and like button, and follow me here and at my blog. And of course, if you aren't following me on my Facebook and my Instagram page, I do live videos all the time. I put content there that I don't put in my other platforms. And so you definitely want to make sure that you are joining me there. So subscribe, friends, subscribe, please, and thank you. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. And if you enjoyed this class, again, visit me at my blog and of course my podcast, here at my YouTube channel and my social media platforms. But now I'm going to stop sharing my video, and so I really love being here with all of you guys and talking gardening and showing you guys different cooking recipes. I just made my homemade strawberry freezer jam, and I just did my strawberry rhubarb dump cake. Next coming up, friends, strawberry rhubarb jam. So I am going to be making a batch of that and showing you guys that probably in tomorrow's video or the following. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining me here. I really do appreciate your support here and at all my other platforms. And I really do mean it when I say leave a comment. I love your feedback. I love if you have some tips and tricks. Is there something else you use to trellis? I'd love to know. And maybe something somebody listening or myself will want to incorporate. But one thing I always encourage everybody to do is to eat fresh, shop local, and have a happy day. I will see you in the garden and the kitchen later, friends. Bye now.